like tanks.
Not right now. So that's
Guys,
Alex
thank you
next
so
to you.
much for making it out this morning. We have a treat, John and Nancy Mantle here to help us strengthen the knots. So we're really fortunate to have them. This is something that we are strengthening the knot. Our practical parenting workshops we're trying to do each in the fall and in the spring, just to really strengthen our marriages and our friendships. So John and Nancy, they have been married for 53 years, so we can certainly learn a lot. They've been disciples for over 40 years. John was in the Navy, served in the Navy, and then he was working as the vice president of HR for the Chicago hospital. Nancy was a pediatric nurse. They were married, they became Christians, and eventually they went into the full-time ministry. They've served as elders and in the full-time ministry for almost 30 years. He served, what did you say? Yes. John served as an elder in Chicago, in LA, in St. Louis. They're now in Kansas City. They've got 3 great kids that are way older than I am, so that's funny even saying. But they've also got, I think, 8 grandkids. Their family is just such an incredible family. We are so fortunate to have them in our neck of the woods and to be able to sit at their feet this morning and just learn. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to them. I think we're going to have some time all together, and we'll split up as well, some time men and women. So it's just going to be a great morning, but I'm just going to turn it over to them and really encourage us to open our hearts to what they've got to share with us so we can really strengthen our marriages. But let's go ahead and pray, and I'll have them come up. God, thank you. Thank you so much for the blessing of marriage. God, thank you that you've blessed us with our spouses. And God, thank you that you've given us your word to guide us and how to do that in the best way and have just incredible marriages. God, I pray that we can strengthen our marriages this morning. Please speak through John and Nancy. Thank you so much for bringing them to our part of the world. And we are so fortunate to be able to learn from them and just love them very much. Open our hearts this morning. It's in your son Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right.
Come on, John.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having us here. You've got the old people today. And marriage is so huge. And Nancy will begin telling the story in just a minute. It is a gift, and it's not easy necessarily. But what God has planned for us is absolutely available to everybody. I tell people all the time that just, we've been through it, and Nancy will share a lot of that to begin with. But we'll spend time with couples that are in various stages, sometimes of pretty significant struggles. And I look at them, I say, you know what, the reality is, for the God that created the universe, everything in it, did all the stuff that he does and continues to do, fixing you two is really just not a big deal for him. All he's asking you to do is cooperate. That makes all the difference in the world. And, what he did for Nancy and I has been stunning. And now, 53 years later, it's just really awesome because every day I get to look at that, and she has to look at this. So
life isn't fair.
So I came out on the top end of that one all the time. So anyway, we're going to kind of go through our story because it's our story is what makes God. Is that God? It's the most powerful thing that we have, to offer you. So I give you my wife.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting us. Our goal whenever we teach a marriage class is to encourage those who are doing well and to encourage you to always strive to do better and to give hope to those who might be feeling hopeless. John and I have gone through many trials through our 53 years of marriage, But for as many trials as we've gone through, we've had that many victories. And so I want to encourage you with that. I thought I'd take a few minutes just to share our story. Since John and I have spoken a few times, I think, for the Heartland Church. Several of you probably know our story, but for those of you who don't, hopefully it will help you in some way if you're facing any challenges right now. John and I were childhood sweethearts. We actually met when we were 12 years old. We were in the 7th grade. And when we graduated high school, America at that time was in the throes of the Vietnam War. And instead of waiting to be drafted, my husband decided, or then boyfriend decided, to enlist in the Navy. A few days before leaving for boot camp, he took me on a very special date into the city of Chicago. And after we parked the car, we took a walk along Michigan Avenue and stopped at one of Chicago's very famous landmarks, the Buckingham Fountain. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. I know Kansas is pretty famous for their fountains, but we sat on a bench for a while admiring the lights, and then suddenly John stood up and got down on one knee.
Oh, wow.
And yes, he proposed. You know, I was so excited. He planned to take me out for a romantic dinner there in the city, but I was so excited. And back then, we didn't have cell phones like we do now. I just wanted to get in the car and drive home and share the news with our families. So that's what we did. I'm sorry. No matter how many years I've been doing marriage classes or speaking in front of a small group, large group of people, dry mouth is my enemy, so I don't have to forgive me. 5 months later, after that proposal, on December 23rd, John and I got married. We were barely, and I mean barely, 20 years old. I was 20 by 3 months, and John was 20 by 1 month. But we walked down that aisle and committed our lives to each other. Our traditional wedding vows went something like this. I, Nancy, take you, John, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. To have and to hold, well, that wasn't going to be much of a challenge. We had just been separated for 5 months, so the thought of being together was pretty exciting to both of us. For better, for worse, well, after a brief honeymoon in Chicago, we drove to Norfolk, Virginia, where we settled down in our very first apartment. We unpacked our wedding gifts, bought our first television, had our first telephone installed. You know, back then, they came to your house or your apartment and they installed a telephone. Anyway, so what could be worse? This was all for better. We had this whole life ahead of us, and we were very excited about starting it together. For richer, for poorer. You know, I never did understand why we said for richer first, because with John being in the service, we made maybe $500 a month. So think about living on $500 a month. But we always believed that sometime in the future, the richer part was going to come, you know, the richer, the poor. In sickness and in health. For many years, I suffered from recurring debilitating migraine headaches. And sometimes the pain would get so intense, I just wanted to lay down and end my life. They were so horrific. But John took care of me. He'd help me get undressed. He'd put me in bed. He'd darken the room by putting blankets over the windows. He'd unplug the telephone. He'd close the door and just pray. And I want to tell you, I am so grateful that I had him there for me during those horrific headache periods. And it wasn't too many years, well, it was several years later then that I was diagnosed with cancer. And John was there for every doctor's appointment. He was there for my surgery. He was there for 8 rounds of chemotherapy, 6 weeks of daily radiation treatments. He was my rock. He was my support. I'm so grateful for that. To love and to cherish till death do us part. When we got married, we were best friends. We were each other's first and only love. And of course we believed that we were going to be together forever until death do us part. 2 years after we were married and just 3 weeks before John was deployed for 6 months, our first son was born. And after serving 4 years in the service, John was discharged and then went back to college to get his degree. After graduation, he got a great job. We bought a brand new 3-bedroom house. We had our second child. Life was pretty good. From all outward appearances, we were living the American dream. But time passed, and this is where the love and cherish forever challenge started. Kids came along, pressures of life, personal interests, and priorities began to change. Before you knew it, we lost sight of our commitment, the commitment that we had made to each other. And after 11 years, we found ourselves growing apart emotionally and physically. I have to confess that I had become a very bitter, angry, frustrated wife. And I didn't want to live that way. I didn't want to have that kind of marriage anymore. Like I said, after 11 years, we were growing apart physically and emotionally. The arguing had stopped, but it was replaced with silence. There was an obvious void in our lives, and one that couldn't be filled with a better paying job, a nicer house, a nicer car, or even more children. Time once spent planning our future was now spent planning our divorce. Without a strong spiritual foundation and with little faith in God, we hired a divorce lawyer. We put our house on the market. We decided how to divide out our personal belongings. We even had conversations about who was going to take which one of our children. And then we shared the news with our parents and some of our closest friends. Do you know what? God said no to our plan. He had a different plan. And it was a plan that brought Roger and Marcia Lamb, for those of you who know them, into our lives to share their faith with us and to share the good news of the gospel with us. So we committed to studying the Bible and God's plan of salvation, and for our marriage and our family was made clear.
You know, we tell this story a lot. My life was a mess. I was in a lot of sin. I didn't want to be with anybody else, but I just lost all hope. I was broken. The thought of a divorce was never encouraging to me, but we just didn't know what to do. I'm just saying we that's where we got to. I feel all the time when I share, when Paul would go to someplace new, and oftentimes instead of opening the Bible and say, well, let me tell you about what Isaiah said or whatever, he just said, you know what, I was riding on this horse one day and I was going to Tarsus, and this big. He shared what happened to him. We can never ever minimize the story that you have and the power. People say, I don't know what to share. What he did changed lives in those brief moments that he shared his own personal conversion. We do the same with this. When I look at miracles in my life and where we were and where we got to, I was a mess. I became unfaithful during that time. Everything was wrong. And I hate sharing that. But it's who I was. And it's who I know I can become if I don't have the Lord in my life. I'm under no delusions about how awesome I am. I'm just not. I need to never forget that. I want God to know I never forgot what he did for me and what he brought back from absolute destruction. But we didn't know, we were both religious, grew up religious. Even during this time, we were going to church every Sunday. We would say the Lord's Prayer at nighttime. It was a mechanical process. Never doubted. But I didn't know him. I didn't know who he was. Finally, we just looked at each other and said, there's got to be more. There's got to be more than this. And it's like anything else. God says, if you seek me with all your heart, guess what happens? If you seek me, you'll find me. And that's where it finally got to. We can't let this go and lose this family that we both wanted. And can we love each other again? That's another question. Sometimes you get to a hopeless point and say, I just can't do it. We're sharing this because I don't know where you are. Some of you are going to be in a great place, good for you. Some of you are just starting out, good for you. Some of you are not in a good place. And I understand that. I hope not as bad as what ours was. But I'm the last guy to look down my nose at anybody's sin, I gotta tell you that. What I've done and where I've been, I hope is worse than most. Because I wouldn't want anybody to share it. But I know the power of what God can do and what he does when we finally listen. And when he says, this is what you can become. I love that passage in Ephesians 3:20 and 21. When God says, I can do more than you can ask or imagine. And what God was saying to me, he says, please don't think I'm limited by your puny imagination. I'm God. Okay? Get over it. I can do anything. And that was something, even though I couldn't understand it and I couldn't see it, it was there. And opening the Bible and start for the first time and start to see that there really is a God. I mean, this God that I've talked about now is sort of believed in, that he's very, very real. And that's what began to change everything in our lives. And we say that because is this a practical part? Absolutely. You're not going to tell me if we're in an argument, I should say this or not say no. This. If I get what God is trying to tell me, because he created me, he created her, he created you. He created marriage. And he says this can be amazing. We brought sin into our life, that's on us. But he says, hey, take heart. I've overcome the world. We can make it through this and make it better than you could ever imagine.
I remember on the day that I was baptized, I confessed Jesus is Lord, promising to love him with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength. But it was also a time that I had to remember the vows that I made to John, the vow I made to him 11 years earlier. So my priorities needed to change. It was time to let go and let God take control of every area of my life. I started focusing on scriptures like Philippians 1, and I'm going to read it, verses 9 to 11. And now this is my prayer. This is Paul in his letter to the Philippians. And now this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless until the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. You know, as my love for God grew deeper, so did my love for John. God was teaching me to love my husband unconditionally the way God loved me, and to forgive him the way God had forgiven me. Submitting to God and his word now meant submitting to John as my leader. And for some reason, the idea of submitting to God at that time seemed a whole lot easier than submitting to John. I don't know if any of you can relate, but if I was going to be obedient to God and expect our marriage to dynamic to change, then I was going to have to be obedient to God's direction. Scriptures like Ephesians 5, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with them. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. his body, of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. I would be lying if I said this changing of the guard came easy, because it didn't. I was third generation of women being taught, I am in charge. And now it was time for me to let go and let God take control.
Sisters, that's got to be one of your favorite words in the Bible, right? I want to. What if I can help you here, and what if I can even make you like it? Katie said, "Please." Thank you. Jeez. Okay, listen. What I love to do in the Bible, when things come up, I always try to figure out how does this relate? Marriage and family, which we almost lost, is crucially important to us. And everything revolves, in a manner of speaking, that gave me the grounding that I needed with the Lord to understand, because what He's given me. But when I read the Bible, I'll always try to figure out, how does this relate to me and marriage? And it's interesting. People say, well, why is there so few scriptures in the Bible relating to marriage? You got Ephesians 5, you got, 1 Corinthians 7, but a couple things here and there. Why is there so few? Listen, everything we do as Christians, it's about our marriage. We're the bride. The bride of Christ. I mean, this is everything. He says, I'm the same yesterday, today, and forever. Everything relates. Every relationship, all the way through. That's the way I think it. I was going through one time, it's been a number of years ago, and I was looking at the creation, Genesis 1, and something like just sparked in my head. Okay. When God created the world, every day, those 7 days that are listed there, every day there was more complexity in the world. It started off it was plain and void, and just nothing going on. Then He separated the water, and then all kinds of, then vegetation. I mean, the complexity, all of a sudden, there's forms of life growing, everything changes. Then animals, all kinds of them, birds and fish, and stuff. The complexity goes on. And then, man, a mind, thinking, planning, preparing. But there was one more level of complexity.
Yeah.
And then God does something absolutely stunning. He takes His most complex creation and places her under the authority of a less complex creation. Which begs us to ask the question,
Why?
let me see what you think of this. I believe every day with God's creation, all that, every day is more amazing, more amazing, more amazing. I believe in my mind and heart, without question, a woman was the pinnacle of this creation. Everything was preparing. That was the last of it. And we look at men and women, and there's a difference. Obviously, we look at women, and even science finally figured it out a few years ago. The emotional depth of a woman is very different than a man.
Yep.
Right? It's not only deep inside, it's also very much on the surface. I don't know a lot of the reasons, I'll never understand, but I can tell you one that I absolutely understand. It's in babies, in childbirth. All of us that are fathers, we love our children, but I tell you what, when you watch that young mom holding that little tiny baby, the connection between those two, all we can do is sit back and say, wow, it's there. But with that also comes the ability to suffer a lot of pain, surface and deep. So God's got a plan for this whole thing. We understand that a woman was created in the mind and the eye of God. just exactly the way he wanted. Women, have you ever said or thought to your husband, say about this about your husband, why don't you understand me? Why don't you get me? Right? We do it. God made you exactly how he wants you. And he also created man exactly how he wanted him. I believe this firmly. When it comes, the emotions, all that kind of stuff that a woman will have, I think God created men so they cannot go there. His plan. I think God didn't need two of us in the house that were, there's a difference. You're going to be different. Why? Men can get hurt. We can get hurt badly. But there's a point in time with guys, even though it's there, it's got to deal with it, but we sort of shrug it off and say, okay, I got to go. That's us.
Yeah.
Those same arrows can pierce a woman's heart, and it can leave a scar that never go away. And it's deeper, the hurt is deeper. So what God is saying, I believe, is this. I've got this amazing creation. The last thing I did. But if she's out here all by herself and those arrows are flying, there's danger. So man, I've created you differently. You don't deal with that level. So I've created a safe place for her. That if those arrows fly and hit, I need them to hit you to protect her. The submission isn't, well, you're better, I'm better than you, and I can do this, this isn't about a man saying, the Bible says that you got to do it. If we're there, we don't understand very much about Scripture. But if we're there to say, listen, I will be whatever I can be. And if those arrows are there, I need to take that. So I need to be that. And it puts a great responsibility on us men. Because if I'm not a safe place for my wife, then she has none. It doesn't work any other way. And God created us, honestly, women, you need to feel good that he can't go where you go emotionally. And stop asking questions about asking him to do something that I don't think God even wants him to be able to do. Now, we need to learn, we need to grow, we need to understand as much as we can, but I'll never be her. I don't want to be her. I want to be me. I want to be that guy that is the protector. I think that's what God created me to be.
Amen.
But that submission is to God. Okay, God, it doesn't make any sense, but I get it for this. Your love for me as a woman, your belief in the treasure that I am, the fragileness that I have, and you created a safe place for me, all I should say is thank you. But the expectation on that man is huge. You need to be that. If you're not that safe place, then you got to repent big time.
Amen.
Nancy needs to feel safe. That's my goal in life, that she always will feel safe in my hands. That I am that one place, perhaps if there's nothing else, that I will go there. That to me is what submission's all about. God says, trust me. Just trust me. Submit to him. That's your safe place. I don't want you to get hurt. How does that change your opinion about submission? Better? Some of you are saying, yeah, I don't have it. And to the husbands, we'll talk. Because being a man and a man of God is what God's direction is in us. So that that family is safe and cared for. It was a long time before Nancy felt safe with me. But finally, God opened that door.
Amen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, these changes that John and I needed to make in didn't happen overnight. They happened over a period of time with a lot of people in our lives, and a lot of times spent on our knees praying and reading and encouraging one another. We learned to fight fair because we were still going to have disagreements, but we had to learn how to work through those challenging times. So as John and I were seeing our need for God more clearly every day, it was obvious that surrendering to God's plan was going to be the solution to healing our broken marriage. I found it very comforting to read scriptures like Ephesians 5, and I'll start in verse 25. God had given John the charge to love me just as Christ had loved the church and gave himself up to her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. And the scriptures like that brought a lot of comfort to me because I knew that God wasn't just working on my heart, he was working on John's heart. We were working on things together. And the more we focused on God, the more we focused on each other, the more we focused on changing ourselves, the happier we were. We were surrendering to each other as we were surrendering to God. And you know, this charge that God had given John, has given John to protect me, I could either make it difficult for him to lead me, or I could surrender and become the child of God that he wanted me to be and the wife that he wanted me to be. And I knew that I had to keep on reading and studying and getting input and growing because that was still my responsibility. But it was so comforting to know that I had John there keeping me on track all the way. You know, we've made it our goal to have a marriage that's focused on God and pleasing to God. The day we got married, we became one physically. The day we were baptized, we became one spiritually with God. And God brought new life into our dying marriage. Sisters, I can't tell you how grateful I am for the marriage that John and I have now, for the life that we have, the family that we have. When I think back to that time when we were planning our divorce and separating our children, and I can't imagine where our children would be today. They draw their security from mom and dad. They draw their security from knowing that mom and dad love God, and we're going to protect them, and we're going to love each other, and we're going to build a home where they can feel safe and secure. I'm so grateful that God was patient with me. I'm so grateful for God's unconditional love, his grace, his mercy, his forgiveness. I'm so grateful that I've had people in my life through the years that have pulled me aside when they've seen things that areas that I still need to grow in and change. I'm grateful that I can get up in the morning, and if I'm having one of those mornings where I'm feeling really low and I don't know why, I'm feeling emotional, I'm feeling sad, and I don't really know why. All I have to do is go to my husband, put my arms around him and say, I'm having one of those days. And I don't know why. So you see, it's not just that our husbands don't understand our emotions. Sometimes we don't understand our emotions. You know, there's times when, as our children got older and they moved away from the home, and we moved far away from their homes, I miss my children. I miss those early days when we'd go to the park and we'd go to movies and we'd laugh and we'd sit around the dinner table telling stories on each other. I miss those times. And sometimes it took just the two of us talking to surface what it was that I was feeling and why. And John's always been there to reassure me, and sometimes we just get in the car and take a trip. We go see one of our kids. But I think openness and vulnerability with one another is so key. And if you're not sure what it is that you're struggling with, and talking with your husband isn't going to help, then bring somebody else into the relationship. John and I have done marriage counseling for years, and I think each time we do it, we realize there's things in our own marriage that we need to grow in and change. So sisters, how about you? Do you remember your marriage vows? What you committed to your husband on the day that you were married? Have you been willing to surrender your marriage to God in His leadership in your home? Are you going to God when you feel it difficult to love unconditionally and to forgive as Christ forgave you? And what about submitting to each other out of reverence for Christ? You know, God made it possible for me to have a second chance in life. And God made it possible for me to fall in love with my childhood sweetheart all over again. And for that, I will always be grateful.
So the message for us is, who do we listen to? There's a story in Genesis 1 when, after the fall of man, God said real quickly, they were, this little phrase, they were naked and they felt no shame. You think, what's naked got to do with anything there? But right after they ate the fruit, they disobeyed God. They went and hid. God came looking and said, well, what are you doing? Well, we were naked. They said, all of a sudden, the reality was different. Amazing. You think about that process. They're walking around, forever, however long it was. I hope it was a good long time before they messed up. They got to enjoy it. But they're walking around in the buff having a good time. Nobody cared. God created them. He knew what they looked like. There was total purity. Were they supermodels? No, they were just two people. But imagine every day being able to look in the mirror and feeling good about yourself. That's what God intended. However, we're looking. Then the world comes along and all the junk comes in. As soon as they were disobedient, and then God says, who told you that? Who are you listening to? You're supposed to listen to me. That's what changed everything. Wherever you are in your marriage, you got to decide, who are you listening to? Well, ours just, you don't understand mine. I don't think God can fix it. Really? So you, to the God of gods, you're saying, God, you met your match here. You can't do this. And God's just looking at you, well, as long as you won't let me, it can't happen. But it's not on God, it's on you. And it's on me. When we finally look at scriptures and we say, you know what, if you tell me this, I can't see it. God says, okay, maybe you can imagine, I get it. But if you tell me this, I know you don't lie. So I can get from here to there. I can become who I am not right now. To become the best of me that you created me to be. That's what this is. When we understand that, the practicals come easy. The rest of it, well, not easy, but he's certainly a whole lot easier.
Amen.
But there's a faithfulness that goes with it. God gave you each other. Sometimes we say, okay, well, God chose this one for me. I don't know if he did or not. I found her. It worked for me, and I wore her down, and I'm grateful for that. God gives us free choice, but what He tells us is, whoever you choose, if you're right with me, it can become this. God didn't make a mistake. God says, fall in love and be there. We love you very much. We believe in marriage. We believe in family. And this if we put this in the right priority and understand the significance of marriage, it's the most significant relationship on this earth. That's why Satan comes after it so much. And frankly, he's done a good job. Commitment to a marriage anymore is not even considered necessary. If it doesn't work out, you divorce, you get somebody else, you don't get married, you just kind of do everything. And he's done a good job with that, but we have got to turn that around.
Amen.
This world desperately needs to see two people that are in love with each other for life. All of it. I don't know where you are in your physical relationship. I got to tell you what, just to say it, I'm 73 years old. Best sex ever. I'm telling you what. You may say, ooh, 73. Listen, I'm telling you what, as long as it's working, it's going. I mean, it is amazing. And you may say,
Mom, Nancy.
you may say, well, it's where Satan attacks right away. Because when there's a problem, that tends to disappear. And now I got two problems. One, I'm not obeying God about, giving myself to one another. In addition to having the other attitudes, that's what he does. And until we say to God, okay, I'm not going to listen to this anymore. I'm going to listen to you. Because you tell me this is right. And it's not easy. It wasn't easy for the Lord to come down here and live those years and go to the cross. I have no right to expect an easier life than my Lord had. But if he did it, and he tells me I can do it, then guess what? We can do this. God bless you. Thank you. Thanks for the time.
Maybe before we take a little 5-minute break here, just responses with kind of our first session.
I appreciate the honesty. I think that means so much in sharing of your life and the vulnerability of how Satan's worked against you, but how because you're we're able to find some humility in your conviction. God was who he was. That he just needed a little bit of faith from you both to salvage that. And so it's very encouraging to think about. In our own lives, we have challenges, but God's always able to overcome those. So,
Great.
I write down questions during lessons, so I just wrote down is, am I being what Kim needs to do? Am I doing what Kim needs to be protected? And so ask Kim, what do I need to do to protect her? Am I a safe place? Does she feel safe in my hands? And how am I making our marriage hard? So those are questions for us to know.
Appreciate those, Kevin. That's awesome. Good stuff. Jake?
I really appreciated the deep thought and reflection about the scriptures in Genesis, about the creation of man and woman. Just think sometimes that those kind of deeper thoughts can be harder to share, but I thought it was really well delivered and really tied in the thoughts about submissiveness and everything like that. So I really appreciate that.
Alex?
Yeah. I really like the new perspective on what submission is. But just getting married, I'm like, I have no idea what this means. Okay, but I really like to my husband needs to be my safe place. It just feels like so much more comforting and more gentle and not so harsh is what I just view submission as being super harsh, and so that was really helpful in perspective.
Amen. Well, guys, why don't we just take about 5-minute break, and then ladies will stay in here. And guys, we're going to go circle up in the foyer, and we'll have some time separately there. I'd encourage you guys, as we're going through this, to really be thinking, okay, what am I learning? Not, hey, did you hear that? Thank goodness. But thinking personally, like, okay, I loved how much you guys talked about, who are you listening to, and just the dynamics within our marriage that God created. And not because one is better than the other, but it's just, guys, trust me, follow the manual and it works out. So I just appreciate that. I also appreciate your guys' example. I think speaking for a lot of the younger marrieds, how, man, even if things are great, anybody can get to this place, and this is how, and this is what, and so for the younger marrieds, I think it's a good warning of, don't, if things are going great, these are things you got to stay on top of, and then, but also just the hope for people who've been married longer, that no matter where you're at, there's still hope, but also the things you guys had to work on, the changes you had to make, the dedication to your marriage, and I just love how much you guys love marriage and family. So, man, thank you guys so much. So let's take a 5-minute break, go to the bathroom, get some